There was a long silence. At last Frodo spoke with hesitation. I believed that you were a friend before the letter came, he said. Or at least I wished to. You have frightened me several times tonight, but never in the way that servants of the enemy would, or so I imagine. I think one of his spies would, well, seem fairer and feel fouler, if you understand.
Welcome to the Wayward Wizards podcast. Today we are reading Chapter 10 of Book 1 of the Fellowship of the Ring. Chapter called Strider. I'm Zach.
I'm Logan.
Logan, we are like fully in it now.
Yeah, Aragorn's like giving him the next steps in the journey and telling him how, even though they've known that things are pretty dire, that he's like, they're more dire than you think.
Yeah.
He's really giving him the what for about their nonsense hobbitry in the common room there. He's like, you little idiots.
Yeah, not as careful as you should be.
You need to
by
be
any means.
A lot more careful than you have been.
Yeah, and it's hilarious that I love how Sam just completely mistrusts Strider in this section. He's just so committed to Frodo. It's hilarious. I vote no, sir.
He's like, anybody who looks sideways at him, he's like, what?
Yeah.
What do you want?
You got something to say to Mr. Frodo?
Yeah, that's right. He's a little big in his britches for just a small hobbit.
Big britches, small legs. But yeah, Aragorn says a couple times that he has a stout heart, which I think is really great.
Yeah, he sort of likes Samwise right away. Aragorn does.
Yeah, I mean he's best character in the whole book. Yeah, I think like once Strider kind of enters the story, it does pick up its own pace. So I will say there's still a lot of exposition in this chapter. There's still quite a bit of like, we're going to read a letter and I'm going to convince you that, you should trust me. I mean, I think if we were writing the story, it might just be like, and then Aragorn comes and then they go to Rivendell, but there's the practicality of they're not just going to randomly trust this stranger they just met. But yeah. Looking at this chapter, what happens? I mean, we get the hobbits kind of rushed into their quarters by Strider, who we don't know yet is Aragorn. And no, that's not true. Actually, they kind of leave the parlor.
Well, they go into the parlor. They leave the common room. What is a parlor?
I guess I always kind of imagine it as like the room off their room, like a little, like it's like where they eat their dinner and there's a fireplace there.
This is a fancy inn.
Yeah,
it's not like a Holiday Inn, where they're just like, go to your room, don't come out. That's what they say to me. They don't want to see me. They don't want me to scare off other guests.
So let's see. It says Frodo, Pippin, and Sam made their way back to the parlor. There was no light. It was not until they had puffed up the embers into a blaze and thrown a couple of faggots that they discovered Strider had come with them. There he was calmly sitting in a chair by the door. So he kind of pulls a Batman.
He kind of does what he wants, and he does that later to Butterbur. He like goes and stands in the corner.
Yeah,
and he's like, "I'm here."
Throw his cowl over, hide in the shadows.
I'm not wearing hockey pads.
Yeah, not all that glitters is gold. I always knew why I love Strider. It's because he's essentially Batman.
Essentially, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, he has this kind of this menacing quality to him. He's pretty gruff. He sneaks his way into the room, which isn't exactly the best way to make friends. But Pippin's kind of like, "Hey, hello. Like, who are you?"
Hello, said Pippin. "Who are you? What do you want?" Pippin's like such a rascal.
"I'm called Strider, and though he may have forgotten it, your friend promised to have a quiet talk with me.
Yeah.
So he's saying, like, you know, I have some information that would be to your advantage, but I have my price. And Frodo assumes that he's talking about money.
Right.
And he's like, well, I hardly brought any money with me. And
I don't have money to spare.
yeah.
Yeah.
But of course, the price that he says is that they agree to take him along with them to Rivendell.
I think once Strider sees these guys, and we find out later in the chapter that Strider saw them on the road and heard them talking about, you know,
Right.
he saw them with Bombadil, actually.
Old Bombadil, he calls him. Yeah, sees him with Old Bombadil.
So as soon as Strider sees them, he's like not going to let them out of his sight.
No.
He slinks over the wall, you know,
Yep.
and then ends up in that common room. And it's funny because the hobbits assume that he's been there, I think, already.
Yeah.
Or at least that's the impression I get in the last chapter. Like, oh, like Aragorn's hanging out in the common room waiting for him. Well, no, he is, but he also like headed him off, talked to Butterbur, asked him not to let him go in the common room. Like, Aragorn's done all this stuff, like to try to protect the hobbits. Like as soon as he saw them, and I think, you know, that follows him kind of following them into the parlor and stuff.
There's such a great bit of irony here that, you know, like everybody mistrusts Strider. You know, he talks about how he has a rascally look. But he kind of puts on, like, it seems like he's in disguise, you know?
Yeah.
Like Frodo's like, you know, why are you talking and dressed like this? Like, clearly you're not who you say you are. So why are you putting on this disguise?
Well, originally Frodo clocks him as a Breelander.
Yeah.
The way he's speaking.
Yeah. He's like, you talk like a Breelander.
But then later on he's I think it's just, I don't know if he says it out loud, but Frodo like realizes that he thought that he was a Breelander by the way he spoke, and now he's speaking differently.
Yeah.
I mean, are we to assume that like Aragorn has to do all this, you know, roguish Strider thing because everyone would just clock him as the king of the world if he was just himself? Is that what's going on here? You think?
I think that's a really good way to put it. I mean, because there's glimpses of Aragorn's true majesty, especially like later on. But even in the Fellowship of the Ring, there's times when you know, one of the characters will look at him, usually Frodo or somebody, and say like, "Man, like there's something special about this guy, like the way he stands, the way he holds himself." But there's a scene in the boats when he sees the standing figures of the Argonath, and that I think is like the real turning point. And we'll have to bookmark that. I'm sure we'll talk about it when we get to that section of the book. But he kind of like stands in the boat, and like Frodo sees him, and he's just like, "Oh, okay, that's the dang king right there."
Yeah.
Like there's no doubt that, you know, he like laments. He's like, "Oh, if I could only just go straight to Gondor and reclaim my crown."
Yeah.
It is true that Aragorn is always king, and the only way that he could not be king is to smear his face with dirt and, you know, grow his fingernails too long or whatever.
Yeah.
And just kind of look like he's been laying in ditches for years. And but yeah, I mean, at one point he says to Frodo, like, "I'm older than I look," you know, which we find out later is absolutely true. He's in his 80s,
right?
But he's got that Numenorean blood in him, so he still looks young,
just like me.
Ooh, like a fine cheese. There's such an irony to the fact that nobody trusts him, but he's probably the most trustworthy person. You know, he's kind of ostracized, partly I think by choice and like how he presents himself.
He's always working for everybody else's good, like everyone around him.
Yeah, and he doesn't expect any thanks.
Yeah, and he's already started doing this before we even know that he's a part of the story. In the last chapter, after they say goodbye to Bombadil. So that's his nature, or his character is to always, you know, be working for the good of his companions, or even not his companions, right? Like, and he doesn't really live in any single world. Like he is this like person who crosses boundaries, because he's a human, but he's like a special human, right? We find
Superhuman.
out later that he grew up in Rivendell. His stepfather is Elrond, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and
Well, kind of like
yet
his foster father, I guess you'd say.
yeah, sorry, foster father. His foster father is Elrond, and yet he also can kind of put on this guise of a Brelander or whatever, or a this roguish kind of character.
Yeah, and
And
he talks about how he served in in Gondor under a fake name, and
right.
he served with the Rohirrim under a different name when Theoden was like a young guy.
It's interesting because we have this like image, I think, in mythology of sort of like a trickster character or something that can kind of like
Yeah, shapeshifter almost.
shape shift and like move around. But he definitely is in that mold of someone who can kind of go anywhere and be anything.
There's just such an irony to it that he is the rightful king of this region, and later he will claim the kingship. And Butterbur especially, just really doesn't like the look of him, doesn't trust him at all. He is always just kind of looking at him crossways. And Sam is the same way. He's just like, hey, like, how about we follow this guy's advice that he just gave us not to trust anybody and start with him?
Yeah, that's
Like,
so funny. I love that
let's
line.
start the whole not trusting thing right now.
Like, yeah, he's right. Let's do it.
Yeah, sounds great. This guy is twice our size. For some reason, he's carrying a broken sword. He smells funny. He looks funny.
Yeah.
He acts funny. Like, let's just stay away. But somehow he convinces them, even before they get the proof of the letter. I think Frodo realizes that this guy's the real deal. He senses who he really is.
Frodo has like an intuition, or like maybe even we could say like a wisdom about other people.
Yeah.
In general, I think, where, and almost like preternaturally, like there's no reason he should be able to just clock somebody, their character having grown up in the Shire.
Right.
But he certainly seems to be able to. He has that ability, I guess.
I will say I chuckled reading the interchange between Frodo and Strider in the beginning. Like, Frodo's like a little sassy with him.
Yeah.
Like, he's just a little fresh. Like this guy could just stomp you into the ground,
Right.
like, even if he wasn't who we know him to be later, he's just twice your size. But at one point he says, maybe Mr. Baggins has an honest reason for leaving his name behind, but if so, I should advise him and his friends to be more careful. So first of all, he's calling him Baggins, which is kind of like letting him know, like, hey, the whole Underhill thing, like,
Yeah.
like, you're not being very slick. And even if you were being slick here, I already heard you give your name to Bombadil, like,
On the road, right?
on the road. So you're not being
Yeah.
very careful. But Frodo sassily says back, I don't see what interest my name has for anyone in Bree, said Frodo angrily. And I still have to learn why it interests you. Mr. Strider may have an honest reason for spying and eavesdropping, but if so, I should advise him to explain it. And you can kind of just imagine Sam, like, in the background, kind of like, you tell him, Mr. Frodo.
So yeah, they go back and forth. Aragorn scolds him for his little, what does he call it? His little prank in the common room where he
Yeah.
accidentally, in scare quotes, puts on the ring.
Yeah.
And really is like, well, you were already being, too indiscreet, and then on account of your performance, and kind of your performance would be very interesting to certain people.
What did Butterbur call it in the last episode? Your acrobatics.
Acrobatics, yeah.
Breaking my crockery.
And then he gives kind of a long paragraph monologue.
Yeah.
About where he's been, what he knows. He says he's older than he looks, as you already said. And he starts to talk about the horsemen, the Black Riders, and about how if you leave without me, they're going to come for you.
Yeah, you won't get far, he says. Yeah.
Doesn't matter if you leave the road. Um, he says they are terrible in a really short sentence, which is pretty impactful, I think. And
They will come on you in the wild, in some dark place where there is no help.
it says the hobbits looked at him and saw with surprise that his face was drawn as if with pain, and his hands clenched the arms of his chair. So Strider is like not afraid, but he is he gets really agitated talking about, like the servants of Sauron.
Right? He says, "Perhaps I know more about these pursuers than you do. You fear them, but you do not fear them enough yet. Tomorrow you will have to escape if you can. Strider can take you by paths that are seldom trodden. Will you have them?"
Yeah.
So I think that's, paths that are seldom trodden. That's definitely like a little reference back to the original character of Strider being a club-footed hobbit named Trotter.
Interesting.
And even the pain in Strider's eyes, the way he's like kind of clutching his chair, that's definitely a memory of who this character used to be, which is a hobbit who was captured by the agents of Mordor and was tortured almost to death, so much so that he lost his feet. So I think that's an example of when Tolkien writes a bit of dialogue, he
doesn't let go of
it ever, even if it gets put into the mouth of another character later, or for example, the sniffing of the Nazgul. The first time the Black Riders appear in the drafts of the stories, it's actually Gandalf coming up on the hobbits on the road, and it says that he's sniffing. And so it's probably just that Gandalf was like sniffing around for him because he knew what they smelled like.
Yeah, right.
But that turns into this character trait of the Nazgul that they like sniff, and there's something creepily sniffing about.
Sort of
and that's
animalistic or something about them.
Right. But I think he treats his own previous drafts as like found texts that he has to either include or answer, which gives it a sense of historicity.
And I think that, I think at this point, Strider is catching the hobbits up on the fact that although their kind of ignorance of what the Black Riders are has in a way protected them thus far, and it's protected other hobbits, that the sort of stubborn, Gaffer and Farmer Maggot, telling these big people that it's none of their business and they need to get out of here. Kind of, they don't have the kind of fear that the Nazgul sort of trade in this fear. They terrify people to death in a way, but that's not all they do, No. And Strider's like, he's not saying, he doesn't say this, but I think the subtext is like, your ignorance about these things are not going to protect you anymore. So you need me to protect you, essentially.
It's like, now you actually need an adult who has some battle experience, who carries a sword instead of a walking stick. And, I think it's telling that in the Barrow Downs, Fog of the Barrow Downs chapter, when Bombadil gives them the Númenorian swords, it says that the hobbits had never considered that they were going to need a sword.
Yeah, they don't see that. They still kind of see this as like a walk, Yeah.
And it's a dangerous walk, but they're not going to be doing any fighting,
Right.
Aragorn comes and provides them with that expertise that they're going to need.
So I think that we need to fast forward to Butterbur coming in the door with candles.
Yeah.
And Knob.
Knob is a great character. He's a thick pated Knob.
Knob is Butterbur's Samwise, I think.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
But it's funny because Butterbur clearly thinks of himself as like intellectually superior to Knob, even though Butterbur is also kind of a dumbass.
Yeah, Butterbur is like running around. He's like a half a brain,
Yeah. Like he just can't remember anything. He's just jabbering, saying like aphorisms all the time. Butterbur comes in and Strider, does the Batman thing again and, goes into the shadows so he can't be seen. He comes in and he's a little shy and he's a little hesitant, but he's like, if I've done any harm, I'm sorry indeed. But one thing drives out another, as you'll admit, and I'm a busy man. Mm-hmm. You know, we talked last time about how he has all these Bree specific aphorisms, and one thing drives out another is one that he repeats here. He says, I was asked to look out for hobbits of the Shire, or for one by the name of Baggins in particular. So, of course, the hobbits, there's other people going around looking around for a hobbit named Baggins. And so the hobbits kind of immediately assume the worst and are kind of like, oh, like, you know, by these like black riders, perhaps you've been told to look out for hobbits. Yeah. But Frodo is like, you know, what does that have anything to do with me? Obviously, you know, my name is Underhill. Like I'm not. And he goes, well, you know, I was given a description that fits you. And Frodo's like, all right, well, let's have it. You know, what's the description? And the description is a stout little fellow with red cheeks. And Pippin snorts.
Pippin chuckled, but Sam looked indignant. That won't help you much. It goes for most hobbits, Barley, he says to me, continued Mr. Butterbur with a glance at Pippin. Oh, it's beautiful. And this one is taller than some and fairer than most. So Frodo's kind of a hottie.
With a cleft chin?
I mean, come on.
A perky chap with bright eyes. What does it mean when someone says they have bright eyes? Does that mean they're like intelligent?
Keep a lookout for the hottest hobbit you've ever seen. You're going to love looking at him.
Smoldering Frodo hobbit.
Baggins. Bright eyes, I think it means sort of like alert. Awake.
Yeah, like be bright-eyed. Yeah. Yeah, this description you can almost imagine being in like Sam's like scrapbook. Like, Mr. Frodo, stout fellow, rosy cheeks, clefted chin, bright eyes, perky fellow. Sam.
Frodo plus Sam forever. And Frodo says, he said it, and who was he? Oh, that was Gandalf, if you know who I mean. We do know.
A wizard, they say he is.
Yeah.
But he's a good friend of mine, whether or no.
Yeah, so I like that. Like, even though he's a wizard, that's nonsense. He's still my friend.
Yeah. Don't hold that against him, that he's a wizard. Right. He says, Barley. Oh, first off, I love that Gandalf just barges into his room without knocking. Like, Gandalf, come on, privacy.
Yeah.
But he says, Barley, I'm off in the morning. Will you do something for me? You only have to name what I say to him. And he asks him to send off a letter. And he tells him to do it as soon as possible. Butterbur says, I can do it tomorrow or the next day. He's like, do it tomorrow. Don't wait. And obviously he didn't get it off. But Frodo gives it away. He goes, a letter to me from Gandalf? And Butterbur's like, oh, so your name is Baggins. It's like, it's everybody knows, Frodo.
Yeah.
Everybody knows at this point.
No one is tricked.
Right. And he says that, you know, he meant to do it right away. He's mortal afraid that Gandalf is going to roast him or turn him into a block of wood. But, you know, he's a busy man and it can't be helped. And we're given a little bit more information that, you know, he's told that he's going to be coming from the Shire, that he's going to be going under the name Underhill. And so to look for him. And Gandalf says to do whatever he can to help him if he comes through. Mm-hmm. And he says, if they're here and I'm not with them, something's gone terribly wrong.
Yeah.
Which we've known, but this is really the first time that someone is like kind of confirming that Gandalf is in some sort of trouble.
Yeah, Gandalf isn't just absent, he's missing. Right.
Yeah. He's not just delayed, he's detained by some force. You know, Frodo's going to say, who could have detained Gandalf? Like, you know, like who could have stopped him? You know, was it the Black Riders? And he's like, it must be either the Black Riders or their master.
Yeah, only Sauron could, you know, or forces of Sauron.
Yeah.
On the level of the Black Riders could detain someone like Gandalf.
So like Aragorn has no like indication, no intuition that Saruman has betrayed him.
He doesn't have reason to suspect that Saruman would cross Gandalf in that way. And then we get, further indication from Butterbur that these black men, the Black Riders, are looking for Baggins, and you can tell that Butterbur also, he understands that these guys are not, to be sort of messed with.
They're bad news. And then he says, and that Ranger Strider, he's been asking questions too. Tried to get here to see you before you'd had a bite or sup, he did. And that's when Strider reveals himself.
He did.
And much trouble would have been saved if you would let him in, Barlaman. You, he cried. You're always popping up. What do you want now? But Strider reveals like the true danger. He goes, these Black Riders, they come from Mordor. From Mordor, Barlaman, if that means anything to you. And it does. They're really scared of this. So they decide, we have to leave, and we have to leave in the morning. So Frodo is like, breakfast at 6, please.
I love that. Like, yeah, we have to leave as soon as possible. Can we get breakfast early?
So breakfast.
When are we eating breakfast?
That'll take. We're gonna fly. If we're
probably
gonna fly from danger,
45 minutes, and then we can get out of town.
Better have
6:45,
a good breakfast. I thought that was really really funny.
A little hobbitry.
But Barlaman says, spooks or no spooks, they won't get in the pony so easily. Don't you worry till the morning. Nob will say no word. No black man shall pass my doors while I can stand on my legs. Me and my folk will keep watch tonight, but you had best get some sleep if you can. So that's when they realize that Merry isn't among them. He had said before that he was gonna.
Was it get some air? Or was it?
I don't know if did he say I'm going to get a sniff of air last chapter? He definitely says it in this chapter. But he says, mind your P's and Q's. He's like, don't go getting yourself into any trouble, stay together. Don't go outside, but that's exactly what we find out he did. But they realize that Merry is gone. They don't just drop everything and go look for him, which I think is kind of hilarious. It just kind of shows they're still not quite fully on guard yet.
Yeah.
But they read Gandalf's letter, which is one of the funniest things in the entire book, I think.
Yeah.
It's got such great humor to it. We learn lots of great information, but it's also just like really ironically funny. Do you want to read a little bit of it?
Yeah, sure. The Prancing Pony, Bree, Mid-Year's Day, Shire Year 1418. Dear Frodo, bad news has reached me here. I must go off at once. You had better leave Bag End soon and get out of the Shire before the end of July at latest. Well, that didn't happen.
Yeah, they missed that by a few months.
I will return as soon as I can, and I will follow you, if I find you are gone. Leave a message for me here if you pass through Bree. You can trust the landlord, Butterbur. You may meet a friend of mine on the road, a man, lean, dark, tall, by some called Strider.
Handsome, beautiful.
Yeah, he's just the most beautiful man you've ever seen. He knows our business and will help you. Make for Rivendell. There I hope we may meet again. If I do not come, Elrond will advise you. I think Gandalf has a sense that he's going to get delayed. Or maybe he just knows that that's how these kind of things go, And I love he's got 3 postscripts, which is really funny.
Yeah, the PS, the PPS, and the PPPS just cracked me up as a kid. I remember.
Do not use it again. Do not travel by night. They've like done both of those things.
They used it like 5 minutes ago.
Make sure he's the real Strider. And then instead of actually giving them a description, he just writes this poem.
What a weirdo.
That all his gold does not glitter. Not all those who wander are lost. And this all is about Aragorn. The old that is strong.
This is a poem that
wither.
Bilbo reads this in Rivendell.
Yeah.
So I think it's a poem written by Bilbo that Gandalf just kind of has ready to quote, like on the drop of a dime. Very, very this is very Tolkien. It's just like, this is one of the most, like, there's elves and dwarves in this book, and the most unrealistic thing is the way that people just spout like perfectly rendered poetry at all times.
Well, and it's almost like here's an extremely complicated riddle for you.
Yes.
Like every line of this is a riddle, and that'll help you figure out who Aragorn actually is. Like, make sure he's the real Strider. Here's a riddle. Like, what?
I'm gonna tell that to my kids. I'm like, hey kids, be sure and leave for the bus on time today. Those who leave for the bus on time will understand this little rhyme. It's like, they'd be like, what?
Dad, why are you being so weird?
Just tell me what you want to know.
And then he takes a shot at Butterbur. and like we just get like a little glimpse into his mind. Like, I hope Butterbur sends this promptly. There's no reason for him to write that, but it's just, I love that. A worthy man, but his memory is like a lumber room. Things wanted, always buried. So funny.
Oh, I need to get that tattooed on my body. Because it is so true. Like, if you're stored lumber, the one thing that you want is always buried.
It's always in the back.
It's like, oh, I need this like little like foot long piece of oak, and so I'm gonna go search for it.
And it's there.
It's there because you had it left over from another project, and you decided not to throw it away. But then you're digging through, a 6-foot pile of lumber, and then 3 hours later you find it. And it's like, oh great, I'm so glad I saved time by finding this perfect piece of lumber that was.
I could have just cut a new piece, but instead
but I needed this one that was buried. So yeah, I love that. A worthy man, but his memory is like a lumber room. Things wanted, always buried. If he forgets, I shall roast him.
Frodo says he deserves roasting because he's really made a mess of things. Although I think Butterbur makes an attempt. He asked a couple people, hey, are you going to the Shire? Nobody was going. Can't take it himself. He's too busy. He's got the number one drinking establishment in Bree.
Yeah.
And apparently.
He's a busy man.
Yeah. And then it sort of, like things do, ends up at the back of the junk drawer.
Yeah. And he couldn't exactly just drop it off at the post office.
No, exactly.
He doesn't raise a flag on his post office box and then it's taken away. Like before the postal service, if you wanted a letter sent, you had to pay someone to travel.
Who was already going that way. Yeah.
And how many days did it take the hobbits to get to this point? Like if they hadn't been waylaid, it'd probably take like
6,
a couple days, 3 days.
Oh, I see. Yeah. At least a couple days.
Like if they gone by road. So like you're paying someone to do like, a solid 5-6 days of work. Yeah. Like that's not going to be a cheap ask, so, but yeah, Frodo's worried. He's like, it sounds like he's going into danger. I mean, like he says like, I may not survive if I die, ask Elrond for help. So that's unsettling for Frodo, but Aragorn, who's still a Strider, he says, Frodo says he writes as if he was going into great danger, but Strider responds, he's been doing that for many years. And Frodo's like, hey, why didn't you just tell me who you were at the beginning? And Strider's like, well, if I had, I don't think you would believe me but I must admit that I hoped you would take me for my own sake. A hunted man sometimes wearies of distrust and longs for friendship. But there, I believe my looks are against me. And Pippin's like, yeah, I mean, you look rough, man. He's like, yeah, your looks are against you at first sight at any rate. But handsome is as handsome does, as we say in the Shire. And I dare say we shall all look much the same after lying for days in hedges and ditches.
It's funny.
Pippin's like, yeah, you look like Strider. You look terrible.
It would take more than a few days or weeks or years of wandering into the wild to make you look like Strider, he answered. And you would die first. Unless you're made of sterner stuff than you look to be. Well, I think they are made of sterner stuff than they look to be. Maybe that's a little foreshadowing.
Yeah, when Frodo gets skewered by the spear in Moria, they're like, that spear would have skewered a wild boar, but you're made of tougher stuff than you look.
Right.
But yeah, they're still a little flabby and they're still a little, they're just little dudes. But Sam, you can just imagine how he looks when he says this, but he's just like, all right, I'm still not sold on this guy. Like everybody else may be thinking this guy's okay. I'm still not trusting him. Like, how do we know that he's not some sort of spy?
Right.
How do we know he's not play acting? How do we know he didn't kill the real Aragorn and take his place? And that's when Aragorn stands up and he goes, if I wanted the ring, I would have had it already.
Yeah. If I could have killed the real Aragorn, I could certainly take care of you three.
Yeah. And he says, but I am the real Strider, fortunately. Looking down at them with his face softened by a sudden smile, he said, I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn, and if by life or death I can save you, I will.
And then we get that great line, and I think this is so profound, that Frodo did believe that he was a friend before the letter, or he wished to. And even though he's been frightened of this guy, he hasn't been frightened in the same way that servants of the enemy would.
Yeah.
And he says that one of his spies would seem fair and feel fouler, if you understand.
Yeah.
Which, says a lot about the kind of people who, when their aim is to do you harm, they're going to try to trap you with something, sweet.
Yeah.
Whereas someone like Strider almost has to hide his sweetness in order to function in the world.
Yeah.
Because he, otherwise, as we, talked before, people might clock him as this, leader of men.
Yeah. And there's a couple characters in the story who clearly are, so Gandalf, he refers to himself as like Gandalf uncloaked after his return. And he like kind of warns people. He's kind of like, like, watch out, because like if you keep it up, you're going to see Gandalf the Grey uncloaked. So there's a sense that Gandalf, the reason why he kind of is presented as a little old man, is because if people saw who he truly was, with his like spiritual power,
right.
The kind of guy who can fight a Balrog and win.
Yeah.
He wouldn't be as useful in the world. Like he's able to have some anonymity. They're misjudging of him as a tool that he uses. And he intentionally cloaks his majesty. And I think that's the case with Aragorn as well. He uses it to his benefit. But when Theoden is ill, like when Grima has kind of like leached him of his power, people don't take him seriously, and he doesn't have that same type of gravitas. But once Gandalf takes him outside and he kind of like sheds that illness, and people like fall down at his feet and they're like, lead me, Lord.
Yeah.
Like lead me. So there's a sense in Tolkien like where a king is not just somebody who had a rich, powerful dad. A king is somebody with like spiritual power that's undeniable and visible. And so when Aragorn, takes off the guise of the ranger and puts on his full self, his true self, people can't help but they melt when he walks in the room. He commands people not for any trying. It's just a natural part of who he is.
Well, the sort of sacral dimension of the characters who have this power, sets them apart, right? So it sets Aragorn apart, it sets Theoden apart, it sets and like the distinction between somebody like Gandalf and somebody like Saruman. Like Saruman literally lives at like in a huge tower, that like no one can approach, and everybody he talks to sort of does his bidding because he has this like word power, whatever, command. A spell, literally. A spell meaning word. Yeah, exactly. And so, Gandalf kind of having this, guise as the Grey, the Stormcrow, this little old man, is part and parcel of the way that he moves through the world. So, that idea that all that is gold does not glitter, is, which, all that glitters is not gold is the phrase that is in my head first. So I'm assuming that Tolkien is playing on that, like an older phrase. That'd be interesting to know. I'm not sure.
I know we were just making fun of the the poem, but maybe we should actually read it.
I actually think it's really beautiful.
It is. I think it's one of my favorite pieces of poetry. It's just such a Tolkien thing to do, to be like, oh, and then this character will, break into, a perfect recitation of a poem.
Yeah. And it's funny that it's like how you, I mean, it's the funny part is like, how useful is this? And like the postscripts get funnier and funnier, right?
Yes.
Until he's like just making fun of, and then he even, he even writes his final signature, his rune, really huge at the end. Even that is sort of funny. Do you want to read the poem?
Yeah. And he signs his name after every postscript. So it's like, yours in haste,
and
Gandalf,
each one,
and then he signs it.
Each one gets bigger and bigger.
It's just like, how much haste can he be in if he has time to write a poem? But yeah, let me let me read this piece of poetry. All that is gold does not glitter. Not all those who wander are lost. The old that is strong does not wither. Deep roots are not reached by the frost. From the ashes of fire shall be woken. A light from the shadows shall spring. Renewed shall be blade that was broken. The crownless again shall be king. So we learn a lot about the character of Strider from that poem. I mean, it's like, not all that is gold does not glitter. So he is gold. It's just gold that's obscured with dirt and grime.
Right.
He doesn't glitter, but he is gold. Not all who wander are lost. He's out in the wilds, but he's not without purpose. Like he is going to be the king, even though he's crownless. He'll be king again.
Right.
The old that is strong does not wither. Deep roots are not reached by the frost. So he's old. Mm-hmm. He's sturdy. He's got deep strong roots. He's got ancientry. He's like an old tree. You just try to chop that thing down. Its roots go deep, and its body is tough. Just try to chop it down. From the ashes a fire shall be woken. A light from the shadows shall spring.
Yeah.
And then here's a line that is great. Renewed shall be blade that was broken. The crownless again shall be king. So the broken blade that he's carrying with him cut the ring of power from Sauron's hand.
Yeah.
This is a blade from Numenor that was held by the king of Gondor and Arnor, Elendil. Elendil died throwing down Sauron. Sauron's dead body is laying limp on the field of battle.
Yep. And
Isildur takes the broken sword and cuts the ring off the finger of Sauron, disembodying him. What a badass thing to be carrying around. I mean, like, I'm trying to think of what would be what would be a similar thing for us just to be carrying around. This happened 3,000 years ago. It's like, okay, we're carrying King Arthur's sword.
The spear of Longinus or whatever that, pierced Jesus' side on the cross, or,
maybe Excalibur.
Yeah. Or like an iPhone with a cracked screen. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
oh yeah.
But it's
what do
weird.
We carry around? We don't carry around crap. That's
the only reason
important.
The only reason I say that is because I think it's really weird that he's got a broken sword. He doesn't have a proper sword.
That's what I was going to ask.
It's like you could get. I mean, Aragorn, like, you could have a real sword.
So here's my question, and I've always wondered this. I have this written down to ask you. Okay, so he reveals his true self. He puts his hand on his sword to show them that he could kill him if he wanted to.
It's in a scabbard, is it not? Yeah,
it's in this. But then he pulls it out. He says, I am Aragorn, and these verses go with that name. He drew out his sword, and they saw that the blade was indeed broken, a foot below the hilt. Not much use, is it, Sam? Said Strider. But the time is near when it shall be forged anew. So here's my question. Is he walking around with just a broken sword that's only a foot long? Basically just a dagger length sword, or does he have another sword with him?
So I don't remember what happens at Weathertop well enough to say.
We'll have to mark that. I mean, he fights him with fire at Weathertop.
Right, and so
I don't think he fights him with a sword.
he doesn't even take his sword out. I don't know if he does have a. I think he does. I think that it's in character for Aragorn to say, "I'm not going to use any sword. I'm not going to.
until
I'm not going to fix the screen on my iPhone until I can get that real nice tempered glass on it. You know what I mean? Until it's
yeah,
time. Like
yeah.
so he's got this thing, and it's like a symbol to him of the fact that it's not time yet or something to claim his inheritance.
But he's been fighting in all these wars and stuff in Gondor and Rohan. Like, is he
I
just
mean,
like fighting on in battles without a sword?
I no, I think he picks up a sword. I think when he's like going to Gandalf or to Gondor and Rohan, it'd be people would look at him sideways if he pulled out his
I
little
just
like
wonder.
broken sword.
Like, part of me is like, and this is not said explicitly, but I just wonder if this just shows that he's like such a badass that he's able to fight in all these wars without even using a sword, because it's like the sword that I carry is like not even useful, so I just have to like use my freaking hands.
I guess that wouldn't give it. I mean, it wouldn't give it away that he's Aragorn, but I still think it'd be pretty conspicuous that like,
yeah,
he's got like who's this guy that joined the army who he doesn't even have like a real sword? Like, what's his deal? Like
he's like the Hacksaw Ridge guy. Like he doesn't carry.
Yeah,
like he still distinguishes himself, but he doesn't carry a weapon.
Right?
Like, and I wonder. I mean, talk about like this like brings him back to Batman again. Batman's no guns.
Well, and he's a healer, right? So like maybe
Yeah.
maybe when he signs up for Gondor, he's like a medic or something. You know what I mean? Like,
well, I think
maybe he's there.
That's one of those like things about Tolkien. I literally, so I've always wondered this. I've always wondered like, okay, so does he just like not? And I don't think we'll also have to earmark this and see if it mentions him using any other blade. But I get the sense where it's just like he's this mythic character who, like, not only does he carry this broken sword around, but he like refuses to use any other sword because no other sword is worthy of him.
Right.
So instead, he just goes throughout his life without using a sword.
I definitely think that's at play. I have a hard time imagining him never using any other sword, but I also think that, in his kind of guise as a, in the like Dunedain Rangers thing, it would make sense that he would only have the broken, sword. I just
like carries it ready for when it's time to reforge it.
Does he have all the little pieces with him? Is that? I mean,
well, that's the other thing. It's like, are all the other shards like just down in the hilt, and he has to like shake them out when the time comes?
Maybe he's got a little purse, and he
what if he loses one of the shards? But it seems like, and I think we get some more of this like as the story unfolds, and we'll have to kind of. It seems like, okay, they kept the shards all the way from Isildur's time. They kept them in Rivendell.
Right.
Isildur's heirs maintained them, and then they said that they wouldn't reforge it until the ring was found again. That once the ring was found again, they would reforge it to fight, because it'll be needed to fight Sauron. Yeah. It has like real legitimate power, and it's not just a symbol of like the reforging of the kingdoms of Gondor and Arnor and the return of the king. It's also like a desperately needed weapon to fight Sauron if he were to get the ring back. Because it's the one that threw him down before.
Right.
And he fears it. Sauron, like when he reforges the sword and he shows it to Sauron in the Palantir.
Right.
And that's that weaken, like just seeing it weakens Sauron enough for them to do their last march in Return of the King.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess that's my question. I guess in my mind, I'd like to think that he just like any other sword is beneath him, so he won't use it.
I would love to hear from listeners what they think. Do they think that he has not used a full sword? I mean, ever.
It's almost like he's like waiting for marriage, He's like,
I mean, honestly, like that kind of like chaste romanticism is like right in the pocket for Tolkien.
That's a Tolkien thing, Like
absolutely.
he's waiting to marry Arwen, and he's waiting to like, you know, use this like phallic, like not to get, hopefully we don't get like an explicit marker for our talking about like phallic imagery in Tolkien, but I mean it's you know, we already talked about Orthanc. I mean, talk about phallic imagery.
Yeah,
Orthanc, Barad-dûr, Minas Tirith's
right.
pyre,
Yeah,
you know, and the sword.
the sword.
You know, the reforging of the sword. He's, in my mind, he has never used another sword and never will.
I think you're right. I mean, I think if I had to choose, I would say that it tracks for that kind of romantic notion that he's waiting for the time when the sword is needed.
Yeah.
Or it will be passed on to, well, yeah, to his offspring, but he doesn't have, you know, it's
Not yet.
um
Because Arwen's the only one that's good enough for him.
and Bilbo has like written this, I mean, this prophetic kind of verse, and he's like, this is about Aragorn.
Yeah. Sam is to Frodo as Bilbo is to Aragorn, like writing fan poetry.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, renewed shall be blade that was broken is about the blade and about sort of Aragorn and Aragorn's line, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think you're right that it tracks that blade and marriage are sort of the same. They're part of the same kind of
The forging of two into one.
yeah, exactly.
You know, but I think it's also, you know, like in medieval times, which is like what this is kind of like, you know, based on.
Mm-hmm.
I think very few people would have the technology of a long sword.
Yeah.
Like most people are just not walking around with a steel sword that's sharp and polished and ready to go.
Right.
They may have like daggers or clubs or
Spears.
You know, so like something that's easier to maintain, like a sword. You have to take care of that thing every single day, or it's going to rust and it's going to get dull. And so it's not something that you're using a lot. Like if you use a sword once, you have to do a lot of work to get it back to being pristine again.
Yeah.
So it's not something like, I think maybe because of fantasy literature, we have a tendency to think of people just using their swords all the time.
Right.
But I think it'd be a rare occurrence to use a sword at all anyway. So I don't think it's necessarily like unrealistic to be like, this guy has never used a sword.
And actually, if he signs up with Gondor just as like a, you know, grunt,
yeah,
he's using a spear or a lance.
Yeah, he's being given, you know, a piece of equipment to use maybe, but he's probably not a knight in the front with you know, with
and then in Rohan, I think they're using spears too because they're on horseback. You know,
yeah, and they have swords, but
unless you're a prince or whatever, like
right. So maybe he's just like, he's humble, but he's really good at fighting. He doesn't need. But I mean, like, you know, here's the thing. Like in movies, whenever there's something that someone pointed out. Now every time I watch a movie, I can't unsee it. The most unrealistic thing that happens in movies is like one person fighting 5 or 6 people.
Oh yeah, it's ridiculous.
Like in the real world, in a real fight, if there's 2 people versus 1, the 2 people almost always win.
Always win.
If someone is like slightly bigger than the other person, they almost always win.
Yeah.
If it's a 1-on-1 fight, the bigger person will win. If you're in a fight and one person has a sword and one person doesn't, the person with the sword always wins.
Yeah.
You know, if you're in a fight and someone has a knife and the other person has a gun, the one with the gun always wins. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like in Aragorn's case, like I think this is like his like superhuman. He's not like other guys. Like if someone else has a sword and he's fighting them, he wins.
Because he's Aragorn.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, who knows? Maybe the Dunedain, you know, in general, they sort of have this like mystique.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why. Like you don't want to fight these guys.
No.
But I think the point about other, you know, about a sword being a pretty rare piece of technology.
Yeah.
And then the point about, you know, there being other sort of
like Butterbur doesn't have a sword.
No, definitely not. And so it would be,
Bill Ferny doesn't have a sword.
No.
So he just doesn't need it for like, like day to day. Like if
Yeah,
he's getting in a fight, he's not getting into a sword fight.
right, because there's almost no one who's like drawing on him,
Yeah. No.
And if they do draw on him, it's maybe with like a mace or a club or a dagger or something like that. I think he might have like a dagger in his belt. Aragorn.
So in the movie, like once again, this is becoming a movie to book comparison podcast, maybe a little too much, but in the movie he carries a sword. That's just not.
Yeah, and we expect him to, right? Like that's part of fantasy literature. Like he's gonna have a sword.
Yeah.
Everybody has a sword. Boromir has a sword. Every elf you see has a sword. Like they seem to all have a sword, but but that's you kind of expect that from other fantasy literature. But yeah, I think you're right. I think he doesn't have a sword. He maybe uses other implements when he needs them, but as far as the sword goes, he's got this broken one.
Yeah.
It's kind of sweet that he carries it with him, All right, where are we? We need to talk about Merry and the Black Breath.
Well, one thing before, let's just kind of quickly say, after our 20-minute digression on swords, I love that Strider is like, with Sam's permission, we can call that settled. It's ironic because Sam is the lowest rung of the ladder, and he calls him Master Samwise, like kind of from this point on, almost like tongue in cheekly. But it also shows a respect. Like he respects Sam, but he's also being like a little ironic about it because Sam is the least prestigious member of the group, and he is not the decision maker. But he's like, it'd be almost like if I was like with my kids and I said like, to the youngest one, like, okay, with Tiana's permission, like let's get going. Like if she just threw a fit, but it's a knowing thing. But they say they're going to make it to Weathertop, which he says is a high place where if we're able to shake off their pursuit, we'll make it to Weathertop and we'll look around. And if there's any place where if Gandalf is going to try and meet us, it would be at Weathertop. And Weathertop is like kind of in between Bree, and then you have Weathertop, also called Amansul, which is right before the last bridge. And then you have the Trollshaws, and then you have Rivendell right there. So it's kind of, as I'm looking at my map, it's kind of like 1/3 of the way between where they are and Rivendell. But if you look at Hobbiton and you look at Rivendell, Weathertop is almost like smack in the middle between Hobbiton and Rivendell. So it's like a strategic place that he has identified as where they're gonna try and meet Gandalf, or at least like get a good look around. And Rivendell has been this place that's their goal. It doesn't seem like they quite know exactly how to get there. But he's just like, look, if you don't take me with you, you will not make it to Rivendell. Like you'll be waylaid. And here's where we get the bit where Frodo says, do you think the Black Riders have anything to do with Gandalf's absence? And Strider says, I do not know of anything else that could have hindered him except the enemy himself. But do not give up hope. Gandalf is greater than you Shire folk know. As a rule, you can only see his jokes and toys, but this business of ours will be his greatest task. So there's more to Gandalf than meets the eye.
Yeah. Yeah, even though he's a wizard, the hobbits are still pretty ignorant about what's going on in the wider. Yeah.
They don't realize that he is this like ancient, powerful being. And that's when they realize that Merry is still missing.
Yeah, Merry's missing. Where is he?
And just then Nob and Merry come through, and
that's right.
Merry says, I've seen the Black Riders.
Black Riders, cried Frodo. Where? And it turns out they're here in the village. He stayed indoors for an hour. And then you didn't come back, so I went out for a stroll. And it says when he's looking at the star, he's just outside the light of a lamp, looking at the stars. He shivered and felt something horrible was creeping near. And it sort of overcomes him.
Yeah, it says a deeper shade among the shadows across the road.
Right. And then Strider interrupts. Mary's sort of freaked out, you know. Frodo tells him to keep going, and I think it's really fascinating. I guess I had never really like paid attention enough to this before, but he's overcome, and Nob sees him just sort of
Kind of passed out. Yeah.
passed out on the ground with these kind of shades over him. It looked to me as if two men were stooping over something, lifting it.
Yeah.
And he gave a shout.
So Nob drives him off. I guess is it implied that that's the Black Riders themselves?
I don't know if it's the black. I think so, but I suppose it could be, you know, one of these Southerners and what's the other guy's name from Bree? Fernie, is that it?
So let's read it. It says, so Nob goes to look for him. He says, just nigh Bill Fernie's house, I thought I could see something in the road. I couldn't swear to it, but it looked to me as if two men were stooping over something, lifting it. I gave a shout, but when I got up to the spot, there were no signs of them, and only Mr. Brandybuck lying by the roadside. He says, I thought I had fallen into deep water.
Yeah, it says that he hears something right before that. It says he hears something by the hedge. Something was muttering or whispering or hissing. I couldn't tell what it was. I was almost like compelled to go toward it. And then when he tries to get away, he feels that feeling behind him and falls over.
Strider calls it the Black Breath.
The Black Breath. Yeah, so there's some kind of wraith powers that will overtake you and can kind of knock you out.
Well, it seems to me that Nob kind of like the Gaffer drives away Black Riders. You know, so I mean, and I think this gets to something that we've mentioned, which is that the Black Riders' power, and Strider says this explicitly.
Yeah,
he says that that they're strongest in the dark, and they're strongest when there's loneliness. Mm-hmm. That their weapons are loneliness and fear and terror, and so even a place like the Prancing Pony is like a fortress to them that they can't penetrate.
Anywhere with lights on and cheer, is impossible for at least this far from Mordor.
Yeah.
They're like powerless to invade that. And, you know, it reaffirms for me something that I noticed in my last reading, which is that it's like very important for the hobbits, as funny as it is to say, like, you know, we need to stop and eat breakfast or dinner or whatever.
Yeah.
It's very important for the hobbits to stop and have those meals and to sing and to be merry, because it keeps the kind of forces of evil at bay in some way.
Swords aren't what is going to keep them safe. It's going to be it's going to be fellowship.
It's their spirit. It's their fellowship that keeps them safe. And I think this is definitely confirmed here. And somebody like Nob, at least at this point in the story, can drive off the Black Riders through his concern for for Merry. And so there's like a tension here between, you know, how terrible these things are, but then also your ability to sort of confront them comes out of a spiritual place, not out of some kind of strength or, you know, prowess in like dealing violence or something like that. Pretty interesting. Yeah. The Black Breath. I don't know if we hear more about the Black Breath. I think that's really fascinating.
Is that the only time that we get the Black Breath all capitalized like this?
I think it may be.
In the entire book?
Kind of unfortunate, because I like that, you know, we kind of get this glimpse of like the fact that they have this some kind of power that they can use to overcome people. But their power is in terror. And already some in Bree are in their clutch. So they use terror to manipulate other people with kind of more physical forms. The Gatekeeper and Fernie and others. Then they make a plan to...
Yeah, they bar the door.
Disguise their rooms and set up some kind of mannequins or whatever in their beds, and put another log on the fire to keep things bright and cheery.
Yeah, and they put decoys in their beds, which is great.
That's a great image. Well, here we are talking about the movie again, but it's a great image in the movie because for anyone who hasn't read the book, it's pretty affecting. You're like, what is happening?
Yeah. If you hadn't read the book, you'd just be like, all right, well, it's nice knowing those little guys.
Before we go, I wanted to say that Frodo peers out the window and he sees that the sickle was swinging bright above the shoulders of Bree Hill. It's the moon, right? And we get a footnote. I love a footnote in a fiction book. The Hobbit's name for the plow or Great Bear.
So I don't think it's the moon.
It's a
constellation.
Major?
I think it's a constellation.
The Great Bear, to me, that's the Big Dipper.
So the Big Dipper is also called the Wain in Lord of the Rings.
Okay,
and
so it's not that.
The 7 stars of the Great Dipper are the 7 stars above the tree of Gondor.
Oh, I see.
So it's a symbol of the house of Elendil.
Right. So that comports with Ursa Major, which means Great Bear.
Huh.
But I've never heard it called the plow. I don't know if that's an English thing.
So it's called the wain later on, and a wain is a cart. So if you look at the Big Dipper, you can kind of see how it looks like a wheelbarrow.
Yeah.
And he uses the word wain to describe a cart later on when the women and children of Gondor are fleeing Minas Tirith. Right. It says that they're using their wains, carrying their belongings to flee the city. Right. So you can imagine them kind of pushing wheelbarrows.
Yeah, 2-wheeled cart. Yeah.
Right. This is another example of just kind of like him paying really close attention to what constellations would be visible exactly this time of year. He'll never mention stars being visible that wouldn't be visible. And the way that stars and other celestial objects are symbols of strength and hope, purity, goodness, light, that embolden and ennoble us down below, give us strength and courage. And this like symbol of Aragorn's house, is in the heavens.
Right.
It's written in the stars.
And then just for good measure, those of us who skipped the very long song that Frodo sings in the last chapter won't know what he means, but Merry says, "Jumped over the moon," chuckled Merry. Very ridiculous of you, Frodo. So Tolkien's pretty impressed by his own work there, I guess. And
I wish I'd been there to see it. The worthies of Bree will be discussing it 100 years hence. I hope so, says Strider. This is saying, yeah, you guys keep laughing. I hope we make it through the night.
Yeah, right, exactly. So that was
Chapter 10.
Chapter 10, Strider.
We are cooking with gas.
Next we have A Knife in the Dark. Chapter 11 of Book 1. Now, just glancing at the first 2 pages, there's a lot of exclamation points. So it gets pretty exciting here.
Fire! Foes, awake!
I'm looking forward to it.
We got 2 more chapters in this book, and then we're done with Book 1, which means we're almost a sixth of the way through already.
Yeah, dude.
Well, thanks for reading along with us, everyone. Going on this journey with us. Mm-hmm. Things are about to kick up.
Popping off.
Yeah. It's a real sprint to Rivendell, which of course then comes to a dead stop for the Council of Elrond.
Yeah, it gets pretty dense.
But things are about to pick up.
So if you enjoy the podcast, please share with a Lord of the Rings fan in your life. You can follow us on YouTube and Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all the other places where you get podcasts, of course. Don't forget to subscribe, give us a like and a review.
And you can send us corrections at info@waywardwizards.com.
next week we'll get into chapter, I think we already said this, chapter 11, A Knife in the Dark. And don't forget that all that is gold does not glitter. We'll see you next week.
Not all who wander are lost.
Indeed.
See you next week.
Bye.